Did you know that the average life expectancy in medieval England was around 31 years? And that was if you survived childhood. Infant mortality was so high, maybe 1 in 3 children died before their fifth birthday. The world was full of plagues, famines, and wars. Life was short, it was brutal, and it was deeply uncertain. So how on earth could people from such a time teach us anything about finding our purpose? We think of purpose as a modern luxury. Something you find after your basic needs are met. You go to university, you travel, you try different jobs, you read self-help books. You look for that one thing that makes you feel alive. But what if that's all wrong? What if the harshness of medieval life gave people a clarity we've lost? They didn't have a million choices. They had a few. And within those limits, they had to find meaning. They didn't have the internet to distract them. They had community, tradition, and a deep sense of their place in the universe. They knew death was always around the corner, and that changes how you live. It forces you to ask the big questions. What am I here for? Oh, what is my duty? What truly matters? Maybe their wisdom isn't about grand, world-changing ambitions. Maybe it's simpler. It's about how to live a good life within your own small corner of the world. It's about craft, community, and commitment. It's about facing reality, not escaping it. We have more freedom, more health, and more information than any king or queen in the 14th century could have dreamed of. Yet, many of us feel lost, anxious, and without purpose. So what do they know that we've forgotten? What secrets to a meaningful life are hiding in the so-called Dark Ages? Number 25. What if your final day was your best guide? In the Middle Ages, they didn't hide from death. They lived with it. A common practice among monks and scholars was memento mori. It's Latin for remember you will die. It wasn't about being gloomy or depressed. It was a tool for focus. Many would keep a human skull on their desk, not for shock value, but as a reminder. This life is temporary. Your time is limited. So, what are you going to do with it? The bubonic plague, the Black Death, swept through Europe starting in 1347. It killed somewhere between 30% and 60% of the population. Imagine half the people you know dying in a few years. Death wasn't an abstract concept. It was your neighbor, your child, your priest. This constant presence of mortality forced a sense of priority. You didn't have time for petty arguments or trivial pursuits when you might not see the next sunrise. We do the opposite today. We sanitize death. We hide it away in hospitals and funeral homes. We use soft language. Someone passes away or is no longer with us. We strive for eternal youth with skincare products and medical procedures. We've become experts at denying the one certainty of life. But this denial comes at a cost. Without a clear endpoint, life can feel like an endless series of distractions. There's no urgency. Why do today what you can put off for tomorrow that you assume will always come? Steve Jobs, in his famous 2005 Stanford commencement address, talked about this. He said, "Remembering that I'll be dead soon is the most important tool I've ever encountered to help me make the big choices in life." He was channeling a very old piece of wisdom. The thought of death strips away the unimportant things. Peer pressure, expectations, pride, fear of embarrassment, they all fall away in the face of death. What's left is what truly matters. Psychologists have a name for this. It's called terror management theory, developed by Jeff Greenberg, Sheldon Solomon, and Tom Pishinsky. It's based on the work of cultural anthropologist Ernest Becker and his 1973 Pulitzer Prize-winning book, The Denial of Death. The theory proposes that the fear of death is a primary motivator for human behavior. We build cultures, create symbols, and seek self-esteem to manage this underlying terror. We want to feel like we are part of something immortal, something that will last beyond our physical existence. A purpose gives us that. It makes us feel significant. By consciously using memento mori, you're not succumbing to terror. You're harnessing it. You're using the awareness of your limited time to clarify your values and live a life aligned with them. It's not about fearing death, but using the fact of death to live a better life. If the awareness of our own mortality is such a powerful tool for creating meaning, why have our modern cultures become so incredibly skilled at denying it? What fundamental psychological need is met by pushing away the one great certainty of our existence? And what is the long-term cost to a society when its members live as if their time is infinite, focusing on comfort and distraction over contribution and meaning? Number 24. What if your work was also your prayer? In the quiet cloisters of medieval monasteries, life was governed by a simple, powerful rule. It was the rule of Saint Benedict, written around the year 530. At its heart was the motto ora et labora, which means pray and work. For the monks, these two things were not separate. They were two sides of the same coin. The physical labor of tending the fields, brewing beer, or copying manuscripts was not just a chore to get through. It was a form of worship. It was a way to honor God through discipline, effort, and creation. The work itself had a spiritual dimension. This idea transformed the concept of labor in the Western world. Before this, manual labor was often seen as something for slaves and the lower classes. The Benedictine monks elevated it. They showed that work, done with care and attention, had its own inherent dignity and purpose. We live in a world that has completely separated work from any sense of the sacred. For many, work is just a transaction. You trade your time and skills for money. The goal is to get through the workday so you can get to your real life in the evenings and on weekends. We talk about work-life balance as if work is the opposite of life. This split creates a deep sense of dissatisfaction. If you spend 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, doing something you feel has no meaning beyond a paycheck, that's a huge portion of your life spent in a state of quiet desperation. The medieval monk had a purpose built into his every action. The rhythm of prayer and work gave structure and meaning to his entire day. We have lost that integrated rhythm. The modern psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi spent his career studying what he called flow. He described it as a state of being completely immersed in an activity. Time seems to disappear. You feel challenged but not overwhelmed. You are using your skills to their utmost. It's a state of optimal experience. In his 1990 book, Flow, the Psychology of Optimal Experience, Csikszentmihalyi found that people reported being in a state of flow more often at work than during leisure time. This seems counterintuitive. We think of leisure as fun and work as drudgery. But work often provides clear goals, immediate feedback, and a balance between challenges and skills. These are the key ingredients for flow. The medieval monk doing calligraphy or the stonemason carving a gargoyle was likely in a state of flow. Their work demanded total concentration. It had a clear purpose. It was their labora, their work, but it was also a path to a deeper state of being, their aura. Finding a purpose might not be about finding a passion. It might be about finding work that allows you to enter that state of flow, work that demands your full attention and rewards it with a sense of accomplishment and meaning. It's about seeing the sacred in the secular, the prayer in the practice. Why has our culture come to define work almost exclusively in economic terms, stripping it of its potential for spiritual or psychological fulfillment? If flow states are most often achieved at work, why do we persist in the narrative that work is something to be escaped? What would our society look like if we were taught to seek out ora et labora, to find a craft or profession that integrates our need for meaning with our need to make a living? Number 23. What if you weren't in control of your life? Imagine a giant wheel. At the top sits a king in all his glory, but the wheel is always turning. As it spins, the king is thrown down into the mud, and a beggar from the bottom rises up to take his place. This was the Wheel of Fortune, or Rota Fortunae, a powerful and pervasive concept in the medieval mind. It was a symbol of the radical instability of life. The goddess Fortuna, a figure inherited from Roman times, was blind. She spun her wheel at random. Your success, your health, your wealth, they were not entirely your own doing. And they could be taken away in an instant. This idea appears everywhere, from the writings of the 6th century philosopher Boethius in his Consolation of Philosophy to the famous 13th century collection of poems Carmina Burana. It taught a profound lesson: do not attach your sense of self or your ultimate happiness to things that are outside of your control. This is the opposite of our modern ethos. We are told we are the masters of our destiny. You can be anything you want to be. The only thing holding you back is you. We believe in control. We create 5-year plans, track our metrics, and optimize our lives for success. When things go wrong, we lose a job, a relationship ends, we get sick, we often blame ourselves. We must have done something wrong. We didn't try hard enough. We didn't have the right mindset. This belief in total control creates a huge amount of anxiety and self-loathing. It denies the reality that luck, chance, and circumstances beyond our influence play a massive role in our lives. The medieval person understood this. They knew that a bad harvest, a sudden illness, or a lord's whim could change everything. Their purpose couldn't be tied solely to achieving a certain status or level of wealth, because they knew Fortuna's wheel could turn at any moment. This medieval idea has a strong parallel in modern Stoic philosophy, which has seen a resurgence in recent years. The Stoics, like the ancient Greek philosopher Epictetus, taught the dichotomy of control. Some things are up to us, our thoughts, our judgments, our actions, and some things are not our health, our reputation, what other people do. The key to a good life, they argued, is to focus all your energy on what you can control and to accept what you cannot with grace. A 2017 study published in the Journal of Personality and Individual Differences found that people with a higher internal locus of control, the belief that they control their own fate, reported higher life satisfaction. But it's a double-edged sword. When that control is proven to be an illusion, the fall can be devastating. The medieval wisdom of the Wheel of Fortune provides a necessary balance. It's not about being passive or fatalistic. It's about humility. It's about recognizing the limits of your own power. Your purpose should be found in the things you can control: your character, your effort, your response to events. You can't control whether you stay at the top of the wheel, but you can control how you behave, whether you are at the top, the bottom, or somewhere in between. If we know that so much of life is determined by chance, why does our culture promote the myth of total self-determination so relentlessly? What psychological comfort do we get from believing we are in complete control, even when evidence constantly proves otherwise? Could our epidemic of anxiety be a direct result of this? Control illusion. And would a healthy dose of Fortuna's wisdom actually make us more resilient, not less? Number 22, what if your purpose was a calling from outside? The modern idea of purpose is often very internal. We are told to look inside, find your passion, follow your heart. It's a process of self-discovery, of excavating something that is already buried within us. The medieval concept was different. It was a vocation. The word comes from the Latin vocatio, which means a calling. It implied that your purpose was not something you invented for yourself. It was a summons from something outside of you. For them, it was from God. Your life had a specific role to play in a much larger divine plan. A priest was called to the clergy. A knight was called to defend the weak. A farmer was called to work the land. This didn't mean you had no choice, but it framed the search for purpose differently. It wasn't about what do I want to do? It was about what am I being called to do? What role am I meant to fill? This shifts the focus from self-gratification to service. A calling is not just about what makes you happy. It's about what the world needs from you. It's about responsibility. This idea gave people a powerful sense of meaning, even if their lives were difficult. The stonemason carving a block of granite for a cathedral he would never see finished wasn't just doing a job. He was answering a call to help build a testament to God that would last for 1,000 years. His individual life was connected to something vast and eternal. We have largely lost this language of vocation. When we do use it, it's usually in a secular sense, like a doctor who feels a calling to heal people. But the underlying idea is the same, a purpose that is less about personal fulfillment and more about contributing to a greater good. Martin Seligman, one of the founders of positive psychology, outlines this distinction in his work. He talks about 3 types of lives: the pleasant life pursuing positive feelings, the good life using your skills to achieve flow, and the meaningful life. Of the meaningful life, he says, consists of using your signature strengths and virtues in the service of something much larger than you are. This is the modern scientific articulation of the medieval concept of vocation. Research consistently shows that people who feel their work serves a higher purpose report greater life satisfaction, are more resilient to stress, and even live longer. A 2016 study published in the Journal of a Mission found that employees who viewed their job as a calling had significantly higher job satisfaction regardless of their income or the prestige of their position. They weren't just working for a paycheck, they were answering a call. Finding your purpose, then, might not be about looking inward at your desires. It might be about looking outward at the needs of your family, your community, or the world, and asking, where can I be of service? If the search for an external calling is more likely to lead to a meaningful life than a purely internal search for passion, why are we so focused on the self? Has our culture of individualism made it harder for us to hear or even listen for a call to service? And in a world without a shared belief in a divine plan, where can we look for something larger than ourselves to serve? Number 21. What if the journey was the whole point? In the Middle Ages, people went on pilgrimages. They would walk hundreds, sometimes thousands of miles to visit a holy site, like the shrine of St. James at Santiago de Compostela in Spain or Canterbury in England. These were not vacations. They were difficult, dangerous journeys. Pilgrims faced bandits, bad weather, and disease. The official reason was to venerate a relic or seek a miracle. But the pilgrimage itself was a transformative process. It was about stripping away your normal life, your status, your possessions, your routines, and walking step by step toward a sacred goal. The journey was as important, if not more important, than the destination. On the road, a nobleman and a peasant were both just pilgrims, relying on the kindness of strangers. The physical act of walking for weeks or months was a form of meditation. It was a time for reflection and repentance. The purpose wasn't just to arrive. The purpose was in the walking. We are a destination-obsessed culture, but we focus on the goal. Getting the degree, landing the promotion, buying the house. Reaching the retirement number, we see the time in between the journey as something to be endured or even rushed. We take the fastest route. We optimize for efficiency. We treat life as a checklist of accomplishments. And then, when we finally reach a goal, we often feel a strange sense of emptiness. We think, is this it? We've been so focused on the destination that we've missed the life that happens along the way. The medieval pilgrim understood that the struggle, the reflection, and the human connection found on the road were the real rewards. The shrine was just the endpoint that gave the journey its direction. This idea is reflected in modern research on happiness. In his 2006 book, Stumbling on Happiness, psychologist Daniel Gilbert explains that we are terrible at predicting what will make us happy. We miswant. We think a certain outcome, a new car, a bigger salary, will bring us lasting joy, but it rarely does. This is due to a phenomenon called hedonic adaptation. We quickly get used to new circumstances, and our happiness level returns to its baseline. What does bring lasting satisfaction, however, is the process of striving towards a meaningful goal. It's the engagement, the learning, the small wins, the overcoming of obstacles. It's the journey. A 2010 study by researchers at the University of California, Riverside showed that the pursuit of a goal, rather than its attainment, is a more reliable source of well-being. The purpose, then, is not a destination you arrive at one day. It's the path you choose to walk. It's the direction you're heading. It's about being a pilgrim in your own life. If we know that the process of striving is more fulfilling than the achievement of goals, why is our entire education and economic system built around celebrating destinations? What are we losing by constantly seeking shortcuts and optimizing for speed, effectively trying to eliminate the journey itself? Could it be that our feeling of purposelessness is a direct result of having too many destinations and not enough meaningful pilgrimages? Number 20, what if you couldn't do it alone? In a medieval town, if you were a carpenter, a weaver, or a stonemason, you belonged to a guild. The guild was more than just a union. It was your entire social and professional world. It set the standards for your craft. It trained apprentices. It took care of you if you got sick and looked after your family if you died. It organized festivals and religious processions. Your identity was deeply intertwined with this group. You weren't just John, the individual. You were John, a member of the worshipful company of Masons. Your purpose was not a solo quest. It was found and lived out within a community that shared your skills, your values, and your way of life. They held you to a high standard, but they also had your back. The idea of finding yourself on your own would have seemed bizarre. You found yourself by finding your place within the group. We live in an age of radical individualism. We are encouraged to be unique, to stand out, to build a personal brand. Like, we move from city to city for jobs. We interact with people through screens. We value independence above almost everything else. But this has come at a huge cost, a steep decline in community. In his landmark 2000 book, Bowling Alone: The Collapse and Revival of American Community, political scientist Robert Putnam documented this trend. He showed how, over the last few decades of the 20th century, Americans have become increasingly disconnected from family, friends, neighbors, and social structures, and the very things that medieval guilds provided. We are bowling alone. This loneliness is not just sad, it's a crisis of meaning. We are social creatures. We are wired to live in tribes. A purpose that is not shared or recognized by a community can feel thin and self-indulgent. The need for belonging is a fundamental human motivation, right up there with food and shelter. This is a core idea in Abraham Maslow's famous hierarchy of needs, first proposed in 1943. After physiological and safety needs are met, the next level is love and belonging. You can't reach self-actualization, the fulfillment of your potential, without first having a sense of connection and community. The medieval guild provided this in spades. It gave its members a shared identity, a common purpose, upholding the quality of the craft, and a safety net. Finding your purpose today might be less about finding a unique individual mission and more about finding your guild. This might be a professional organization, a sports team, a volunteer group, a church, or even a close-knit group of friends. It's about finding the people who share your values and are working towards something alongside you. Your purpose is magnified when it's part of a collective effort. If our brains and societies evolve for deep community connection, why do our modern economic and social systems so often reward individualism and geographic mobility, which actively break those connections? What is the true psychological cost of bowling alone, and how much of our search for personal purpose is actually a search for a lost sense of belonging? Is it possible to recreate the deep, multifaceted support of a medieval guild in our fragmented, hyper-individualized world? Number 19, what if your flaws were your compass? The medieval Christian world was structured around a clear moral framework, the 7 deadly sins and the 7 heavenly virtues. The sins were pride, greed, lust, envy, gluttony, wrath, and sloth. They were seen as the fundamental character flaws that led a person away from a good and meaningful life. But they weren't just a list of things not to do, they were a diagnostic tool. By understanding your primary temptations, you could understand your own character. They were a map of your soul's weaknesses. If you're prone to pride, your spiritual work was to cultivate humility. If you struggled with sloth, your path was to practice diligence. Your flaws weren't something to be ashamed of and hidden. They were the very things that pointed you toward the work you needed to do on yourself. Your purpose, in a very real sense, was to battle your own nature and cultivate the opposing virtue. This runs counter to a lot of modern self-help, which often focuses on accentuating your strengths. We are told to find what we're good at and do more of that. Lean into your strengths. Don't worry about your weaknesses. There is some wisdom in this, but it can also be a recipe for a shallow and unbalanced life. It can lead to what medieval thinkers would have called pride and overemphasis on one's own talents and a neglect of character development. The medieval approach suggests that a deep sense of purpose comes not from ignoring your weaknesses, but from confronting them directly. The struggle itself is meaningful. Overcoming your own worst impulses is a heroic journey. This is the central theme of countless medieval stories, from epic poems like Dante's Inferno, where the journey through hell is a catalog of sins, to chivalric romances where a knight must overcome his own fear or lust to complete his quest. This idea of post-traumatic growth, where people experience positive psychological change after a struggle, is now a well-researched phenomenon. Psychologists Richard Tedeschi and Lawrence Calhoun coined the term in the 1990s. They found that people who face adversity can develop a greater appreciation for life, improved relationships, and a stronger sense of personal strength. The struggle changes them for the better. The medieval framework of sins and virtues is essentially a proactive system for instigating this kind of growth. You don't have to wait for a trauma to happen to you. You can identify your sin, your recurring negative pattern, and treat the struggle against it as your purpose. Carl Jung, the 20th century psychiatrist, talked about the importance of integrating the shadow self, the parts of ourselves we deny or dislike. He believed that true wholeness and psychological health came not from pretending the shadow doesn't exist, but from acknowledging it and learning from it. Your greatest weakness, if faced with courage, can become the source of your greatest strength. In a culture that emphasizes celebrating strengths and projecting an image of perfection, what have we lost by de-emphasizing the importance of confronting our own flaws? Could our modern anxieties stem from a collective shadow of unacknowledged weaknesses that we refuse to face? If your purpose is found in the struggle against your own worst tendencies, what does that mean for a society that increasingly seeks comfort and the avoidance of all internal conflict? Number 18, what if your best work was for someone else's future? When a craftsman in a medieval guild was ready to become a master, he had to produce a masterpiece. This wasn't just a good piece of work. It was the single best thing he could create. It demonstrated his total command of the craft, from the raw materials to the finished product. It would be judged by the other masters of the guild. His future and his reputation depended on it. But the idea went deeper. The masterpiece was his legacy. It was a contribution to the craft itself, a standard for others to aspire to. It was built to last. This mindset was everywhere. Think of the great Gothic cathedrals like Notre Dame in Paris, begun in 1163, or Cologne Cathedral, started in 1248. The people who laid the first stones knew they would never see the final spire. They were building something for their grandchildren and their grandchildren's grandchildren. Their purpose was tied to a timescale much longer than their own individual lives. We live in a short-term world. We are judged by quarterly reports, daily stock prices, and instant social media metrics. We value speed and disruption. We often build things to be disposable. The idea of working on a project that will only be completed long after we are dead seems inefficient, almost foolish. We want to see the results of our work now. This short-term thinking can lead to a crisis of meaning. If our purpose is only tied to immediate rewards and personal recognition, what happens when those things are gone? The medieval cathedral builder had a different kind of purpose. It was a transgenerational purpose. He was a link in a long chain of effort stretching from the past into the distant future. This gave his daily work the slow, repetitive, often grueling task of cutting stone a profound sense of significance. This concept of long-term, legacy-oriented thinking is what the philosopher and environmentalist Roman Krasneric calls being a good ancestor. In his 2020 book, The Good Ancestor, How to Think Long-Term in a Short-Term World, he argues that we have a responsibility to the generations that will come after us. He points to projects like the Svalbard Global Seed Vault in Norway, which is designed to protect crop diversity for centuries, as modern examples of cathedral thinking. This way of thinking requires a shift in our perspective of time. It asks us to consider our actions not just in terms of their immediate impact, but in terms of their impact in 100 or even 1,000 years. This provides a powerful source of purpose. It connects our small, brief lives to the grand sweep of human history. It turns our work from a job into a legacy. If our brains are wired for the immediate gratification of short-term rewards, how can we possibly cultivate the cathedral thinking necessary to solve long-term problems like climate change or social inequality? What cultural values or social structures have we lost that made it possible for medieval people to dedicate their lives to projects they would never see completed? Is it possible for a society obsessed with instant results and individual legacy to find purpose in being anonymous contributors to a future they will never inhabit? Number 17, what if silence was the answer you were looking for? In the medieval world, especially within monastic communities, silence was not an absence of something. It was a presence. It was a discipline. It was a path to understanding. Monks took vows of silence or lived in communities where speech was restricted to certain times and places. This wasn't a punishment, it was a tool for turning one's attention inward and upward. The constant chatter of the outside world, and even the internal chatter of one's own thoughts, was seen as a distraction from what truly mattered. In the silence, you could begin to hear the still, small voice of God, or at the very least, you could begin to untangle the knots of your own mind. The 13th century philosopher Thomas Aquinas wrote extensively about the importance of contemplation, a state of quiet, prayerful thought that was impossible to achieve amidst noise and busyness. For them, silence was a necessary precondition for wisdom and purpose. We have declared a war on silence. We live in an environment of constant noise. From the moment we wake up, we are bombarded with notifications, emails, podcasts, music, and the 24-hour news cycle. We fill every spare moment with stimulation. We listen to a podcast while we cook. We scroll through social media while we wait in line. We watch TV while we eat. Being alone with our own thoughts can feel uncomfortable, even terrifying. We have become so accustomed to external input that the absence of it feels like a void. We are terrified of being bored, but what if that boredom, that silence, is exactly what we need? Like, what if the constant noise is preventing us from hearing the very thing we are trying to find? The scientific evidence for the benefits of silence is growing. A 2013 study on mice, published in the journal Brain, Structure, and Function, found that 2 hours of silence per day prompted cell development in the hippocampus, the brain region related to memory formation. Other studies have shown that silence can reduce stress by lowering cortisol and adrenaline levels. It replenishes our cognitive resources. The French mathematician and philosopher Blaise Pascal wrote in the 17th century, "All of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone." He was observing the same restless need for distraction that we see today. The practice of silence, whether through formal meditation, a walk in nature without headphones, or simply setting aside time to sit and think, is a way to push back against this. It creates the mental space necessary to ask the big questions. What do I really want? What are my values? What is my purpose? You can't answer those questions if you can't even hear yourself think. If silence is so beneficial for our brains and our well-being, why have we engineered a world that is almost entirely devoid of it? What deep-seated fear is driving our compulsion to fill every moment with noise and distraction? If the answers to our most profound questions about purpose can only be found in a state of quiet contemplation, what does it mean for a society that has forgotten how to be silent? Number 16, what if wanting less was the key to having more? In the 13th century, a new kind of religious movement swept across Europe. It was led by figures like Saint Francis of Assisi. They were the mendicant order's friars who took vows of poverty and lived by begging. This was a radical idea. In a world of rigid hierarchies where wealth and land equaled power, they chose to have nothing. Francis, the son of a wealthy merchant, famously stripped off his fine clothes and embraced a life of radical simplicity. This wasn't about self-punishment, it was about freedom. By owning nothing, he was free from the anxieties of protecting property. He was free to go where he was needed. He was free to focus entirely on his spiritual purpose. The philosophy was simple. The more you own, the more your ownings own you. They called this idea contemptus mundi, or contempt for the world. It wasn't a hatred of the world, but a rejection of its transient values, wealth, status, power in favor of eternal ones. Our modern world is built on the opposite principle, the relentless pursuit of more. We are told that happiness and purpose can be found in the next purchase, the next upgrade, the next experience. The entire advertising industry, an estimated $634 billion enterprise globally in 2020, is designed to create a sense of dissatisfaction with what we have and to stir a desire for something new. This endless cycle of wanting and acquiring is a trap. It promises fulfillment but delivers only a temporary hit of pleasure, followed by the desire for the next thing. This is the hedonic treadmill we talked about earlier. We keep running, but we stay in the same place emotionally. This constant striving for more is exhausting. It clutters our lives, our homes, and our minds, leaving little room for a sense of purpose. The modern movement of minimalism is a secular echo of the Franciscan ideal. It's the idea that by intentionally living with less, we can free up our resources, our time, money, and attention to focus on what truly matters. It's not about deprivation, it's about intentionality. It's asking, does this thing add value to my life? If the answer is no, you let it go. A study published in the Journal of Positive Psychology in 2017 found a link between materialistic values and lower levels of well-being. People who prioritize wealth and possessions tend to report less life satisfaction, more depression, and more anxiety. St. Francis understood this 800 years ago. He found that by renouncing material wealth, he gained a different kind of wealth, a richness of spirit, community, and purpose. Finding your purpose might require an act of subtraction, not addition. It might be about clearing away the clutter of modern life to see what remains. If we know that materialism is linked to lower well-being, why is our economic system so dependent on stoking consumer desire? What would happen to our society if a significant number of people adopted the Franciscan principle of wanting less? Is the modern search for purpose through acquisition and experience just a new, more sophisticated form of the very trap that the mendicant friars tried to escape? Number 15, what if you already knew your place? The medieval worldview was highly ordered. They conceived of the universe as a great chain of being. It was a hierarchy ordained by God that stretched from God himself down to the angels, humans, animals, plants, and finally to inanimate objects like stones. Everything had its place in this chain. Within human society, there was a similar structure. The king was at the top, followed by nobles, knights, clergy, merchants, and peasants. This might sound rigid and oppressive to us, and in many ways it was, but it also provided a powerful sense of place and purpose. You were born into a certain role. Your duty was to fulfill that role to the best of your ability. A peasant's purpose wasn't to become a king. It was to be a good peasant. A knight's purpose was to be a good knight. This provided a kind of psychological stability. You didn't have to invent your purpose from scratch. Your purpose was largely given to you by your place in the world. We live in a world of almost infinite choice. We have dismantled the old hierarchies. We are told we can be anything we want to be. This is a great liberation, but it also creates a great burden. The psychologist Barry Schwartz calls this the paradox of choice. In his 2004 book of the same name, he argues that while some choice is good, too much choice leads to anxiety, indecision, and dissatisfaction. When you have 1,000 possible careers, how do you know which one is the right one? The fear of making the wrong choice can be paralyzing, and even after we choose, we are haunted by the opportunity cost of all the other paths we didn't take. We end up less satisfied with our choice than we would have been if we had fewer options to begin with. The medieval person was spared this anxiety. Their path was, for the most part, laid out for them. Their task was not to find the right path, but to walk their given path with virtue. This isn't an argument for bringing back feudalism. It's about understanding the psychological need for a sense of place and belonging. We may have thrown out the Greek chain of being, but we haven't escaped the need to know where we fit in. This is why we form subcultures, join fan communities, and identify strongly with our professions or political tribes. We are trying to rebuild a sense of place in a world that has told us we are free, floating individuals. Finding your purpose might be about consciously choosing your place. It's about accepting certain limitations, not as a prison, but as a framework. It's about committing to a particular community, a particular craft, a particular set of responsibilities. It's about saying, this is my place, and my purpose is to be a good steward of it. It's about trading the anxiety of infinite possibility for the focused meaning of a chosen commitment. In our celebration of limitless choice and individual freedom, have we underestimated the deep human need for a defined role and a sense of place? How much of our modern identity crisis is a result of having to construct a self from scratch without the support of a pre-existing social framework? Could it be that true freedom is found not in having infinite options, but in the voluntary commitment to a particular path, a particular people, and a particular place? Number 14, what if suffering was a teacher? To the medieval mind, suffering was not something to be avoided at all costs. It was seen as an inevitable and often meaningful part of the human experience. From a religious perspective, it was a way to share in the suffering of Christ, a test of faith, or purification of the soul. Think of Dante Alighieri's Divine Comedy, written in the early 14th century. The journey through Purgatory Purgatorio is a process of cleansing through suffering. Each terrace of the mountain purges a specific sin through a corresponding painful trial. The suffering is not pointless, it is purposeful. It is the very mechanism of growth and redemption. This doesn't mean they enjoyed pain. It means they had a framework for understanding it. They had a story that gave meaning to the hardships of life. When tragedy struck, and it struck often, it was not seen as a sign that life was meaningless. It was a chapter in a larger divine story. Our modern instinct is to see suffering as a problem to be solved. An illness needs a cure. Sadness needs an antidepressant. Discomfort needs a distraction. We strive for a life that is as comfortable and pain-free as possible. And when suffering does intrude, as it inevitably does, we often lack a framework for making sense of it. It can feel random and cruel. It can shatter our belief in a just world and leave us feeling that life has no purpose. We have become very good at treating the symptoms of suffering, but we have lost the ability to find meaning in it. The Austrian psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor Viktor Frankl wrote about this in his 1946 book, Man's Search for Meaning. He observed that the prisoners in the concentration camps who were most likely to survive were those who could find some meaning in their terrible suffering, a loved one to return to, a work to complete, a lesson to learn. He famously wrote, "He who has a why to live can bear almost anyhow." The idea that suffering can be a catalyst for growth is central to the concept of Antifragility, coined by the author Nassim Nicholas Taleb. In his 2012 book, Antifragile Things That Gain from Disorder, he distinguishes between the fragile, which breaks under stress, the robust, which resists stress, and the antifragile, which gets stronger from stress. The human spirit can be antifragile. The medievals seem to understand this intuitively. They knew that facing hardship and integrating it into a meaningful narrative could make you stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. Finding a purpose isn't about creating a life free of suffering. It's about finding a purpose so compelling that it can help you endure and even grow from the suffering that life will inevitably bring. It's about finding your why. If a life devoid of struggle is also a life devoid of the primary catalyst for growth and resilience, what are the unintended consequences of our cultural obsession with comfort and the elimination of all pain? By medicalizing and trying to eradicate all forms of suffering, are we robbing ourselves of the very experiences that forge character and reveal purpose? What happens to the human spirit in a world that offers endless distraction from pain but no framework for its meaning? Number 13. What if loyalty was your highest virtue? The entire structure of medieval feudal society was built on a single concept: loyalty. A vassal swore an oath of fealty to his lord. The lord in turn promised to protect the vassal. This bond of personal loyalty was the glue that held everything together. It was more important than laws or contracts. Your word was your bond. A knight's chivalric code was centered on loyalty to his lord, to his king, to God, and to the lady he served. To be disloyal, to be an oath breaker, was the worst thing you could be. This wasn't just a political arrangement. It was a deeply personal and moral commitment. Your purpose was defined by your loyalties. You existed to serve those to whom you had pledged your faith. This gave life a clear direction and a powerful sense of duty. We live in a much more transactional and transient world. We are encouraged to be loyal to ourselves first and foremost. We change jobs frequently, always looking for a better offer. We move from city to city. Relationships are often seen as temporary arrangements that last only as long as they meet our individual needs. The idea of pledging lifelong fealty to a person, an institution, or even a place can seem archaic and confining. We value freedom and flexibility over commitment and loyalty, but this can lead to a shallow and rootless existence. If we are not loyal to anything beyond our own shifting desires, it's hard to build anything of lasting value. A life of purpose is almost always a life of deep loyalties. The philosopher Josiah Royce, writing in the early 20th century, argued that the key to a meaningful life was what he called loyalty to a cause. He believed that we find ourselves by giving ourselves away to something larger than our own self-interest. This cause could be a family, a community, a profession, or a set of principles. The important thing was the act of devotion itself. Loyalty, he argued, is the willing and practical and thoroughgoing devotion of a person to a cause. A 2011 study from the University of Rochester found that autonomous motivation, doing something because it aligns with your values and identity, is a far greater predictor of long-term well-being than controlled motivation, doing something for external rewards or to avoid guilt. Loyalty is the ultimate expression of autonomous motivation. It's a conscious choice to bind yourself to something you value. Finding your purpose, then, is not about finding what serves you. It's about finding something, a person, a place, a principle, a community that is worthy of your loyalty. What have we gained and what have we lost by replacing a culture of loyalty with a culture of contractual, short-term commitments? If a meaningful life requires devotion to something beyond the self, how can we cultivate a sense of loyalty in a world that constantly encourages us to keep our options open? Could it be that our crisis of purpose is really a crisis of loyalty, a collective unwillingness to commit to anything that might demand sacrifice? Number 12, what if ritual shaped your days? A medieval person's life was structured by ritual. The day was divided by the monastic hours of prayer, from matins before dawn to compline at night. The year was shaped by the liturgical calendar, with its cycle of feasts and fasts: Advent, Christmas, Lent, Easter, Pentecost. These were not just dates on a calendar, they were deeply meaningful rituals that connected daily life to a sacred story. There were also secular rituals, the ceremonies of a guild, the rites of passage into knighthood, the seasonal festivals tied to planting and harvest. These rituals provided rhythm, community, and a sense of shared purpose. They marked the passage of time and reminded people of what they collectively believed and valued. Your life wasn't a random series of events, it was a pattern dance, and everyone knew the steps. We have largely stripped our lives of ritual. We might have some personal routines or family traditions, but the grand society-wide rituals that once gave life its shape and meaning have faded. Time feels more linear and monotonous, a relentless succession of workdays punctuated by weekends. We lack shared ceremonies that mark transitions or affirm collective values. This can leave us feeling unmoored, as if we are floating through time without any landmarks. A sense of purpose is hard to sustain without practices that regularly reinforce it. Rituals are the way a community repeatedly tells itself what is important. They turn abstract values into embodied experiences.
In 2018, our approach to competition and daily explore certain experiences have an extraordinary impact on us.
They find that defining moments often contain elements of elevation, insight, pride, and connection. Rituals are powerful because they are designed to create these elements. A graduation ceremony, for example, is a ritual full of elevation and pride that marks a transition. Even small personal rituals can be powerful. A 2013 study published in Psychological Science showed that enacting a small ritual before an activity, like eating a piece of food in a specific way, can actually make the experience more enjoyable. If rituals focus our attention, they signal that what we're about to do is important. If you want to find and sustain a purpose, you may need to build rituals around it. This could be a daily journaling practice to reflect on your values, a weekly meeting with a group that shares your goals, or an annual pilgrimage to a place that inspires you. Rituals make your purpose real and tangible, day after day. As we have moved away from traditional religious and civic rituals, what have we replaced them with, if anything? Could the obsessive rituals of some sports fans or the curated routines of online influencers be a desperate attempt to fill a void left by the absence of more meaningful, shared ceremonies? If purpose is a story we tell ourselves about our lives, are rituals the actions that make us believe our own story? Number 11. What if mastery took a lifetime? In the medieval guild system, you didn't become a master overnight. You started as an apprentice, usually as a young boy. You would live with a master craftsman, doing menial tasks and learning the very basics of the trade. This could last for 7 years or more. Then you might become a journeyman, traveling from town to town, working for different masters, and honing your skills. Only after many years of dedicated practice and the creation of a masterpiece could you earn the title of master. The entire system was built on the idea that true skill takes a long time to develop. There were no shortcuts. Mastery was a slow, patient, and often arduous process. The purpose was not just to learn a job, but to become a master of a craft. This was a lifelong commitment. We live in a culture of the life hack. We want to learn a language in 3 months, get rich quick with a new investment scheme, or become an expert after reading a few blog posts. We are impatient. We celebrate youthful prodigies and overnight successes. The idea of a slow, multi-decade apprenticeship can seem like a waste of time. But this obsession with speed and instant results can be a barrier to finding a deep and lasting purpose. A purpose that can be achieved quickly is often not a very satisfying one. The deepest meaning is often found in the long, slow pursuit of something difficult. It's in the struggle, the incremental progress, the dedication to a craft over a lifetime. This is where true mastery lies, and with it, a profound sense of accomplishment and identity. The writer George Leonard, in his 1992 book, Mastery: The Keys to Long-Term Success and Fulfillment, talks about the importance of loving the plateau. He says that in any long-term pursuit, most of our time is spent on a plateau, where it feels like we aren't making much progress. The hawker gets frustrated and quits. The master learns to love the practice itself. They find joy in the daily discipline, even when the results aren't obvious. This is the path of the medieval apprentice. Malcolm Gladwell, in his book Outliers, popularized the 10,000-hour rule, the idea that it takes about 10,000 hours of deliberate practice to achieve world-class expertise in any field. While the exact number is debated by scientists, the underlying principle holds true expertise requires a massive investment of time. Finding your purpose might mean choosing a craft, whether it's coding, cooking, teaching, or gardening, and committing to the long, slow path of mastery. It's about falling in love with the practice, not just the prize. What has our cultural obsession with speed and hacks cost us in terms of deep skill and lasting fulfillment? If true mastery requires a long apprenticeship and a love for the plateau, How can this be reconciled with an economic system that demands constant, rapid, and measurable results? Have we forgotten that the most meaningful pursuits are often the ones that require a lifetime of dedication? Number 10. What if laziness was a serious danger? We think of sloth or laziness as a minor failing. It's about procrastination, about spending a Sunday on the couch watching TV. But for medieval thinkers, it was far more serious. They called it acedia, and it was one of the seven deadly sins. Acedia wasn't just physical laziness, it was a spiritual and emotional state. It was a kind of listless despair, a sense of boredom and restlessness that led to a person not caring about their responsibilities, their community, or their own spiritual well-being. The 4th century monk Evagrius Ponticus called it the noonday demon that would attack monks in the middle of their day, filling them with a disgust with his cell and his life itself. It was a radical loss of purpose. Acedia was dangerous because it was the opposite of love and care. It was the state of not caring about anything at all. The cure for it was not just to get busy, but to recommit to a life of prayer and work, to re-engage with your purpose. This medieval concept of acedia sounds remarkably like some of the psychological states we struggle with today. We might call it burnout, depression, or kind of existential dread. It's that feeling of, what's the point? It's the endless, aimless scrolling through social media feeds, not for pleasure, but to fill a void. It's the feeling of being overwhelmed by options, but having no motivation to pursue any of them. We often treat these states with self-care platitudes or productivity systems. But the medievals saw it as a spiritual crisis. It was a failure to direct your will towards what is good and meaningful. It was a disconnection from your purpose. The fight against acedia was a central part of monastic discipline. The rigid schedule of ora et labora, pray and work, was, in part, a practical strategy for keeping the noonday demon at bay. By having a clear structure and a constant sense of duty, there was less room for listlessness to take hold. Modern psychology supports this. Studies on unemployment have consistently shown that losing a job affects not just a person's finances, but their mental health. The loss of a daily routine, a sense of purpose, and a social connection can be devastating. This is acedia in a modern context. Finding a purpose, then, is a powerful antidote to this state. A clear purpose provides what psychologists call goal-directed behavior. It gives you a reason to get out of bed in the morning. It organizes your actions and focuses your mind. It is the opposite of the apathy and despair of acedia. Have we trivialized the concept of sloth, turning a deep spiritual danger into a minor productivity problem? Could the modern epidemics of burnout, anxiety, and depression be understood as a society-wide manifestation of acedia, a collective loss of a shared sense of purpose and meaning? If the medieval cure was a recommitment to a structured life of work and prayer, what would a modern, secular equivalent look like? Number 9, what if everything meant something else? The medieval person lived in an enchanted world, a world of symbols. A lion wasn't just an animal, it was a symbol of Christ or the sin of pride. A pelican wasn't just a bird, it was a symbol of self-sacrifice because it was believed to pierce its own breast to feed its young with its blood. This was an allegorical worldview. They believed that the physical world was like a book written by God full of signs and symbols that pointed to deeper spiritual truths. The world was not a random collection of objects. It was a web of meaning. This way of seeing the world is beautifully illustrated in the design of a Gothic cathedral. Every element, the height of the nave, the orientation toward the east, the figures in the stained glass windows was carefully chosen to tell a story and convey a theological meaning. Life itself was an allegory, a journey with a spiritual purpose. We live in a disenchanted world. The scientific revolution, beginning in the 16th and 17th centuries, taught us to see the world differently. We see it as a collection of matter and energy governed by physical laws. A rock is a rock. A bird is a bird. We have gained a tremendous amount of knowledge and power through this way of seeing, but we may have also lost something, a sense of inherent meaning. When the world is just a collection of random objects, it's harder to feel that your own life is part of a larger, meaningful story. We are left to create our own meaning from scratch in a universe that seems indifferent to our existence. This can be a daunting and sometimes lonely task. The human brain, however, is a natural meaning-making machine. We are constantly searching for patterns and creating stories to make sense of the world. This is the basis of narrative psychology, a field that explores how people use stories to understand their lives and their identities. We all have a personal narrative, a story we tell ourselves about who we are, where we've come from, and where we're going. A strong sense of purpose is often linked to having a coherent and compelling life story. The medieval world provided a ready-made, society-wide story, the story of salvation, into which everyone could fit their own life. We no longer have that shared narrative. So finding a purpose is, in many ways, an act of storytelling. It's about looking at the events of your life, the good and the bad, and weaving them into a meaningful allegory. It's about deciding what the story of your life symbolizes. Is it a story of redemption? A story of discovery? A story of service? It's about seeing your own life with the eyes of a medieval poet, finding the deeper meaning in the everyday details. By disenchanting the world, has science accidentally stripped it of the very sense of meaning that our brains are wired to seek? In the absence of a shared cosmic story, are we all forced to become individual storytellers, and are some of us better at it than others? What would it look like to enchant our world, to learn to see the symbolic and metaphorical meaning in our lives and our surroundings without abandoning our scientific understanding? Number 8, what if you used your strength for good? The ideal of the medieval knight was captured in the code of chivalry. Chivalry was a set of moral and social rules for the warrior class. It wasn't just about being a good fighter, it was about using your strength and skill for a higher purpose. A true knight was expected to be brave, courteous, honorable, and to protect the weak and defenseless peasants, the widows and orphans. He was supposed to temper his aggression with piety and mercy. Of course, many real-life knights fell far short of this ideal. They could be brutal and self-serving, but the code of chivalry itself provided a powerful model of purpose. It said that having great strength or ability was not enough. The purpose was to dedicate that strength to the service of others, to uphold justice and defend the good. It was a way of channeling the warrior's potentially destructive power toward a constructive social purpose. We have a complicated relationship with strength and power today. We often admire it in business leaders, athletes, and politicians. But we are also deeply suspicious of it. We worry about the abuse of power, about strength being used for selfish ends. We lack a clear, widely accepted code, like chivalry, that tells us what a strong person is for. What is the purpose of being smart, or rich, or influential? The chivalric code gave a clear answer. Your purpose is to use your advantages to help those who have none. It's a model of purpose as responsibility. The stronger you are, the greater your duty to serve. This idea is at the heart of many modern ethical systems and is supported by psychological research. Dr. Keltner, a psychologist at UC Berkeley, has studied the effects of power on human behavior. His research, summarized in his 2016 book, The Power Paradox, shows that while people often gain power through prosocial behaviors like empathy and collaboration, the experience of having power can corrupt them. It can make them more impulsive, less empathetic, and more focused on their own needs. The Code of Chivalry was, in a sense, a cultural technology designed to combat this very paradox. It was a constant reminder to the powerful that their position was a trust, not a right. Finding your purpose might involve taking an honest inventory of your strengths, not just physical strength, but your talents, your resources, your position of influence. Then, like the ideal knight, you can ask, how can I dedicate these strengths to the protection and service of those who are more vulnerable? This transforms ambition from a purely selfish pursuit into a noble calling. In a world that often seems to reward the ruthless and self-serving, is the ideal of Chivalry October using strength to protect the weak and hopelessly naive. What would a modern, secular code of chivalry look like for our leaders in business, technology, and politics? If power inevitably corrupts, as research suggests, can a consciously chosen purpose of service act as a sufficient antidote? Number 7, what if doubt was a sign of a healthy mind? We often think of the Middle Ages as an age of faith, where everyone believed without question. But this is a caricature. In fact, the intellectual life of the High Middle Ages was characterized by intense debate and rigorous questioning. The dominant philosophical method in the universities that sprang up across Europe, like the University of Paris, founded around 1150, was called scholasticism. The scholastics, with Thomas Aquinas being the most famous, believed that reason and faith were not enemies. They believed that reason was a path to understanding God. Their method involved posing a question, listing all the arguments for and against it, the objections, and then using logical analysis to arrive at a reasoned conclusion. They were not afraid of doubt or disagreement. They saw it as a necessary part of the search for truth. They would stage formal disputations, which were like intellectual tournaments where scholars would publicly debate complex theological and philosophical questions. A sense of purpose for them was not found in blind belief, but in the active, rational struggle to understand. Today, we often seem to have lost this art of reasoned debate. We live in echo chambers, consuming media that confirms what we already believe. We can be quick to dismiss those who disagree with us as being misinformed or having bad intentions. Yes, we can value certainty, even a false certainty, over the uncomfortable process of questioning our own beliefs. This can be a major obstacle to finding a genuine purpose. If you are unwilling to doubt your own assumptions, you might cling to a purpose that is based on a flimsy foundation, one that was given to you by your family, your culture, or your peer group, rather than one you have rigorously examined for yourself. The scholastic method teaches us that a true and resilient purpose is one that has been tested by doubt. It's one that has faced the strongest possible objections and has emerged not necessarily unscathed, but stronger and more refined. The scientific method itself is a system based on doubt. A scientist doesn't try to prove their hypothesis is right, they try to prove it's wrong. This process of falsification, as described by the philosopher Karl Popper in the 20th century, is what allows science to progress. It's a disciplined form of doubt. Applying this to your own life means being willing to question your own goals and values. It means asking the hard questions. Is this purpose really my own? Or am I just trying to please someone else? Is this goal truly meaningful? Or is it just a distraction? What are the best arguments against the path I've chosen? This is not a recipe for endless indecision. It is a way to build a purpose that is robust and authentic. A purpose that you have chosen not out of blind faith, but through the crucible of honest doubt. If reasoned debate and the embrace of doubt were hallmarks of medieval intellectual life, why has our modern information age led to more polarization and intellectual certainty, not less? What are the psychological reasons we prefer the comfort of our echo chambers to the challenging work of a scholastic disputation? Could it be that the most important step in finding your true purpose is to first have the courage to doubt the purpose you think you already have? Number 6, what if humility was a superpower? In the medieval Christian framework, pride was the deadliest of the 7 sins. It was considered the root of all evil, the sin that caused Lucifer's fall from heaven. The corresponding virtue and the foundation of all other virtues was humility. Humility wasn't about having a low self-esteem or thinking you were worthless. It was about having an accurate assessment of yourself. It was about understanding your place in the grand scheme of things, recognizing your flaws, acknowledging your dependence on others, and attributing your talents and successes to a higher source for them, God. Saint Benedict, in his 6th century rule, laid out 12 steps of humility for his monks. These steps included things like obeying one's superiors, confessing one's faults, and being content with the lowest and most menial tasks. For them, humility was not a sign of weakness. It was the essential starting point for any meaningful spiritual life. You couldn't grow if you thought you were already perfect. Our culture often sends the opposite message. We are encouraged to promote ourselves, to build a personal brand, to project confidence at all times. Social media is a showcase for our successes and our best moments. We are told to fake it till you make it. Humility can look like a disadvantage in a world that rewards self-promotion. But this constant pressure to appear perfect and successful can be a huge source of anxiety. It can also be a major barrier to finding an authentic purpose. If you are focused on maintaining an image of success, you might be afraid to try something new and risk failure. You might be unwilling to take on a role that seems beneath you, even if it could be a source of great meaning. You might be unable to ask for help or learn from others, because that would require admitting you don't have all the answers. Pride locks you into a performance. Humility sets you free to learn and grow. Recent research in psychology has started to validate this ancient wisdom. Studies have shown that humble people tend to have stronger social relationships, are more helpful and generous, and are better leaders. A 2012 study in the Academy of Management Journal found that humble CEOs were more likely to have better performing management teams and more effective companies. Humility allows a leader to listen to feedback, learn from mistakes, and empower their subordinates. It is a form of strength. From the perspective of finding your purpose, humility is essential. It allows you to be a beginner again. It allows you to learn from anyone and everyone. It allows you to find meaning not just in glamorous, high status roles, but in quiet acts of service. It allows your purpose to be about contribution, not about ego. In a world that seems to operate on self-promotion and the projection of confidence, is humility still a viable virtue, or is it a recipe for being overlooked? If pride is so psychologically damaging and humility is so beneficial, why is our culture so adept at encouraging the former and discouraging the latter? Like, could it be that the first step to finding your purpose is not to build yourself up, but to embrace a radical sense of humility about what you truly know and what you are here to do? Number 5, what if your life was an epic story? Before the printing press was invented by Johannes Gutenberg around 1440, and for a long time after, most people were illiterate. They didn't get their information and values from books, they got them from stories. Epic poems like Beowulf in England, the Chanson de Roland in France, or the Nibelungenlied in Germany were passed down through oral tradition. These weren't just entertainment, they were cultural blueprints. They taught people what it meant to be brave, what it meant to be loyal, what a hero looked like, and what a meaningful life of struggle and sacrifice entailed. The stories of the saints, told in church and depicted in stained glass windows, provided models of spiritual purpose. People understood their own lives through the lens of these great narratives. They saw their own struggles as a small reflection of the epic struggles of heroes and saints. Their life had a narrative shape. We are still creatures of story, but the stories we consume are often fragmented, fleeting, and contradictory. We get them from 1,000 different sources: movies, TV shows, news headlines, social media feeds. We lack a single unifying epic that tells us what a good life looks like. This leaves us with the task of becoming the author of our own life story. Finding a purpose is, in essence, deciding what kind of story you want your life to be. Is it a comedy, a tragedy, a romance, a story of adventure and discovery, a quiet story of family and community? The psychologist Dan McAdams developed the concept of narrative identity. He argues that we form our identity by weaving the different parts of our lives into a coherent story. People with a strong sense of purpose often have a clear and compelling narrative for their lives, one that explains how their past has led them to their present and is propelling them toward their future. One of the most powerful types of life stories that McAdams identified is a redemption narrative. This is a story where the person transforms a negative event, a failure, a trauma, a period of suffering into something positive. It's the story of from rags to riches, from sickness to health, from sin to salvation. This is a classic narrative arc found in countless medieval stories. The hero is tested, fails, suffers, but ultimately learns and grows from the experience, emerging stronger and with a clearer sense of purpose. You can apply this to your own life. You can look at your past struggles not as random misfortunes, but as the testing part of your hero's journey. They are the challenges that have shaped you and revealed your purpose. Finding your purpose means taking the raw material of your life and crafting it into an epic story that you want to live out. In a world saturated with fleeting, disposable stories, how can we learn to craft a single, coherent, and meaningful narrative for our own lives? If we are the authors of our own story, what responsibility do we have to make it a good one? And what happens when the story we have been telling ourselves about our life no longer makes sense, and we are forced to become our own editors, starting a new chapter from scratch? Number 4, what if time was a circle, not a line? The modern person generally experiences time as a straight line. It starts at birth and moves relentlessly forward toward death. The future is an open, unknown territory. We are focused on progress, on getting ahead, on moving forward. The medieval person had a different experience of time. For them, time was also cyclical. The day was a cycle of prayer. The week was a cycle, culminating in Sunday. The year was a cycle of seasons and liturgical feasts that repeated every year. This cyclical view of time gave life a rhythm and a sense of recurring meaning. The Easter was not just a historical event that happened once, it was a reality that was made present, again every spring. The harvest was not just an economic activity, it was a ritual that connected them back to the harvests of all the years before. This cyclical pattern meant that life was not about constant linear progress. It was about participating in an eternal rhythm, about returning again and again to the same fundamental truths and rituals. This linear view of time can create a lot of anxiety. We feel a constant pressure to be productive, to be moving forward, to not waste time. If we have a setback, it can feel like a disaster because we can't get that time back. The line only moves in one direction. A cyclical view of time is more forgiving. It acknowledges that life has seasons. There are times for planting and times for fallow. There are times for activity and times for rest. A bad year is not a permanent failure. It is part of a larger cycle, and spring will come again. This perspective builds patience and resilience. It relieves the pressure to be constantly progressing. A purpose in this view is not a destination you are racing towards on a linear track. It's a center point that you return to again and again through the cycles of your life. This idea of cyclical living is being rediscovered in various modern movements. There is a growing interest in seasonal eating, in aligning our lives with the rhythms of nature. The concept of a Sabbath, a weekly day of rest, which was central to medieval life, is being explored by people struggling with burnout as a way to build a sustainable rhythm of work and rest. The psychologist Carl Jung believed that the psyche has its own seasons, and that psychological health depends on honoring these natural cycles of introversion and extroversion, of activity and reflection. Finding your purpose might be less about creating a linear 5-year plan and more about understanding your own personal seasons. It's about asking, what does this season of my life require of me? And trusting that the cycles of your life will continue to bring new opportunities for growth and renewal. Your purpose doesn't have to be a single, unchanging goal. It can be a theme that you explore and deepen through each turn of the wheel. If a cyclical view of time can reduce anxiety and build resilience, why is our entire economic and social system built on a model of constant linear growth? What have we lost by disconnecting our lives from the natural cycles of the day, the moon, and the seasons? Could it be that the feeling of running out of time is a symptom of our linear perspective, and that a cyclical view would allow us to feel that we have all the time in the world? Number 3, what if patience was your greatest tool? When the cornerstone of Cologne Cathedral was laid in 1248, the builders who started the project knew they were beginning a multi-generational effort. They were right. The cathedral was not officially completed until 1880, more than 600 years later. This is cathedral thinking. It is a mindset of extreme patience. The medieval craftsman or stonemason had to be patient. Their work was slow and meticulous. They were working with hand tools, not power tools. They were not trying to build something as fast as possible. They were trying to build something as well as possible, something that would last for centuries. Patience was not just a virtue, it was a practical necessity. The entire culture operated on a slower timescale. News traveled at the speed of a horse. Seasons, not minutes, dictated the rhythm of life. A sense of purpose was not expected to be found and fulfilled in a few years. It was a lifelong, and sometimes multi-generational endeavor. We live in the age of impatience. We expect instant delivery, instant communication, and instant gratification. While technology has conditioned us to expect immediate results for everything, this on-demand culture has reshaped our expectations for our own lives. We can become impatient with ourselves if we don't find our purpose quickly. We can get frustrated with the slow process of learning a new skill or building a meaningful career. We might abandon a path, not because it's the wrong path, but simply because it's not delivering results fast enough. This impatience is the enemy of deep, meaningful work. The most worthwhile goals, raising a family, mastering a craft, building a community, achieving wisdom, all require a massive amount of patience. They are cathedrals, not tents. The concept of deliberate practice, identified by psychologist Anders Ericsson as the key to expert performance, is fundamentally about patience. It involves sustained, focused effort on things you are not yet good at. It is often slow, frustrating, and not immediately rewarding. It requires the patience to show up day after day, to do the work, and to trust the process. The author Angela Duckworth, in her 2016 book, Grit: The Power of Passion and Perseverance, argues that grit, the tendency to sustain interest in and effort toward long-term goals, is a better predictor of success than talent. Grit is essentially another word for patience in action. Finding your purpose is only the first step. The much harder part is having the patience, the grit, to stick with that purpose through the long, slow, and often unrewarding middle part of the journey. It's about learning to be a cathedral builder in a world that wants to build everything in a day. If the most meaningful goals in life require immense patience, how can we cultivate this virtue in a culture that is actively training us for impatience? What are the psychological effects of the constant mismatch between our expectation of instant results and the reality of a world where most things of value take a very long time? Is it possible that our frantic search for a quick purpose is the very thing preventing us from committing to the slow, patient work that would actually give our lives meaning? Number two, what if you were not the center of the universe? The medieval person had no doubt that they were not the center of the universe. As God was the center of the universe, the entire purpose of human life was to know, love, and serve God. The individual's needs, desires, and ambitions were secondary to this great, overarching purpose. This was a theocentric, God-centered worldview, not an anthropocentric, human-centered one. This is reflected in their art. In medieval paintings, human figures were often sized according to their spiritual importance, not according to realistic perspective. A Christ or the Virgin Mary would be depicted as much larger than the ordinary people around them. This was a visual representation of their belief system. The individual was a small but meaningful part of a vast divine drama. This perspective gave them a sense of humility and a clear, externally defined purpose. Since the Renaissance and the Enlightenment, we have gradually shifted to a human-centered worldview. We have, in a sense, placed humanity at the center of the universe, and within that we have placed the individual self at the center of their own world. The modern search for purpose is often a search for self-fulfillment, self-actualization, and personal happiness. It's about my passion, my dreams, my legacy. There is nothing inherently wrong with this, but it can create a fragile and self-absorbed sense of purpose. If your purpose is all about you, it can collapse under the weight of your own failures or disappointments. It can also lead to a sense of isolation, a feeling that you are on this journey alone. The writer David Foster Wallace talked about this in his famous 2005 commencement speech, "This is Water." He argued that our default setting is to experience the world as if we are the absolute center of it. Everyone else is just in our way, but he said we have a choice. We can choose to adjust this default setting. We can choose to see the world from other people's perspectives. We can choose to worship something other than ourselves, whether it's a god, a set of ethical principles, or a commitment to a community. He argued that a life of true freedom and meaning comes from this act of decentering the self. This is a profound echo of the medieval worldview. A study published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology in 2014 found that experiencing a sense of awe, the feeling of being in the presence of something vast that transcends your own understanding, can lead to an increase in generosity and ethical behavior. Awe literally makes you feel smaller and more connected to something larger than yourself. Finding a purpose might be the act of finding something so awe-inspiring, so much bigger and more important than you are, that you are happy to dedicate your life to it. Have we, in dethroning God, accidentally enthroned the self, creating a culture of anxious individuals trying to be the center of their own lonely universes? What is the psychological consequence of living without a sense of awe, without a connection to something that transcends our own ego? If a durable purpose requires us to serve something larger than ourselves, what can fill that role in a secular age? Number one, what if your purpose was simply to be good? Underlying all the other medieval concepts of the guilds, the chivalry, the cathedrals was a simple but profound idea. The ultimate purpose of life was to be a good person. It was about saving your soul. This meant cultivating the virtues humility, kindness, diligence, patience, and fighting against the vices. Your station in life, whether you were a king or a peasant, was less important than the state of your character. The art of dying, or ars moriendi, was a popular genre of literature in the late Middle Ages. These books instructed people on how to die a good death, which was the culmination of a good life. A good death wasn't about what you had accomplished or accumulated. It was about whether you died with faith, with repentance, and at peace with God and your neighbors. The final exam of life was a test of character. We are often uncomfortable with such simple, moral language today. We tend to think of purpose in terms of achievement and impact. We want to make a difference, change the world, or leave a legacy. These are not bad ambitions, but they can be daunting. They can set a bar so high that we feel like a failure before we even start. They can also be a form of ego, We can become more interested in being seen as someone who is changing the world than in the quiet, unglamorous work of actually helping the person in front of us. The medieval idea brings the focus back to something much more fundamental and accessible. Before you worry about changing the world, worry about changing yourself. Your primary purpose is to become a person of integrity, compassion, and courage. This focus on character is a central theme in ancient philosophy as well, particularly in the virtue ethics of Aristotle. For Aristotle, the goal of life, or eudaimonia, was not about feeling happy, but about flourishing as a human being. And you did that by cultivating the virtues. A good life was the result of a good character. Modern psychology is slowly returning to this idea. Martin Seligman's work on positive psychology identifies 24 character strengths, like kindness, bravery, and wisdom, that are universally valued across cultures and are the building blocks of a fulfilling life. The focus is not on what you do, but on who you are. This is an incredibly empowering idea. It means that everyone, regardless of their job, their wealth, or their talents, has access to the ultimate purpose. Anyone can choose to be a little kinder, a little more patient, a little more honest today. Your purpose is not something out there that you have to find. It is something in here that you have to build, one small, virtuous choice at a time. In our quest for a grand, world-changing purpose, have we overlooked the simple, profound purpose of becoming a good person? What would change if our education system focused as much on building character as it does on building skills and knowledge? If, on your deathbed, the only thing that truly mattered was the quality of your character, what choices would you start making differently today?